Добрий день, я вітаю всіх, хто приїхав.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Ola Atamanova, and I'm happy to see all of you who joined us in Ukraine Media Center of the War. It's year 11 of the war, and today is day 813 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by the aggressor. And today we will be talking about an important day in our history. Today we commemorate the Day of Remembrance of the victims of Crimean Tatar People Genocide, the tragedy that took place 80 years ago, and the tragedy that adds more sorrow to the fact that the occupation of Crimea is going on for 10 years. So let me remind you a little bit. On May 18, on the year 1944, based on Stalin's order, the deportation of Crimean Tatars from Crimea to Central Asia has commenced. Approximately 200,000 people were forcibly removed in the railway freight cars. The act of deportation resulted in countless casualties. Within days, an entire nation was uprooted from its homeland. Thousands of innocents perished in death trains and in special settlement areas. Entire families were destroyed. So now we will be talking about this. We will be talking about the challenges faced by the Crimean Tatar people. And joining us in our studio are Tamila, Tasheva, the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine to the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and Mr. Refat Chubarov, chairman of the Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people. Thank you for joining us. So let's start talking about this problem. Let's ask ourselves whether we have done everything we should have done so that Ukrainian people, Ukrainian children remember about this tragedy. Thank you very much. Well, basically today we celebrate the day of Vyshyvanka. It's a holiday, it's a bright day, and this press conference is taking place in the eve of the anniversary 18th anniversary of deportation, which will be going on 18th of May. Unfortunately, not all of the lessons were learned, because the lessons are not only supposed to be learned, but the crime is supposed to be punished. Basically, Russian Federation was not held accountable for the crimes committed against Ukraine, or that were committed within centuries against Ukraine and Crimean Tatar people. We have a situation when the deportation that has taken place in year 1944 is repeated in a hybrid way after the year 2014. The Crimean Tatars call it hybrid deportation or silent deportation. What's going on now? Because yes, they are not being put into the freight cars as it was happening in the year 44, but in fact the conditions are created to make sure that the Crimean Tatars cannot live in their historic homeland. And currently, unfortunately, thousands of Crimean Tatars, after the year 2014 and after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, due to mobilization, they are forced to leave their homes and leave for the mainland part of Ukraine, leave for Turkey, leave for Central Asian countries, leave for other countries. And when we talk about these lessons, Russia did not repent about those crimes against Crimean Tatars, about those crimes against Ukrainians, such as Holodomor, and they have not repented about any of their interventions, and interventions of that were accompanied with a lot of war crimes. But talking about Ukraine, I think Ukraine has made a tremendous leap in terms of recognition of Crimean Tatars, on par with Karaims as an indigenous people of Ukraine. Back in year 21, Ukraine as a state declares in all of the program documents about the importance of support of diversity and support of the Crimean Tatar people. I think Refat Aka will give you more color on that, but in a resolution of the parliament that urged other countries to recognize the fact of Crimean Tatars deportation as a fact of genocide, and after the temporary occupation of Crimean Peninsula, and until that urge, a couple of countries joined this urge, like Latvia and Lithuania, Canadian Parliament, and we hope that as a crime against Ukrainian people, it's recognized by a significant number of countries, just as Holodomor was recognized as an act of genocide. Our partners in the same way will recognize the deportation as an act of genocide against Crimean Tatar people. Today, me and Refat were attending an activity related to issue of the stamp, and the post stamp was dedicated to Crimean Tatar embroidery maniac. And in fact, I was not like impressed, but I completely agree with Refat Agha, who said that in the state of Ukraine, in the modern state of Ukraine, there were a number of crimes. First crime was the crime of deportation, and another crime is the Babin Yar and the eradication of Jewish in the territory of modern Ukraine. And what we're currently seeing on part of Russian Federation is repetition of those very same crimes, because Russia uses famine as a weapon when they block the Black Sea ports, when they steal from temporarily occupied territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia region, when they steal the grain from there, transporting it in a legal way to Syria. They continued deportation, that silent deportation that I've mentioned, the silent deportation of Crimean Tatars, and another deportation which is not silent at all, when the Ukrainian children, Ukrainian adults are being illegally deported to Russian Federation. They continue those crimes of extra court executions, eradication of Ukrainian people in the basements, in the torture chambers. So those crimes are the crimes about which Russia did not repent, and Russia again should be brought to liability based on all those crimes. I apologize for such a prolonged speech, but what's important, we celebrate the Vyshyvanka Day today, and the day after tomorrow we will commemorate the Day of Remembrance and of deportation. The persecutions of activists have already started in the Crimean Peninsula. The activists are getting notices from FSB. They are being warned that they have no right to any public manifestations in the peninsula, first of all related to Vyshyvanka Day, first of all, and obviously remembrance of the 80th anniversary of deportation. Russia tries to demonstrate that there are no forms of activity in the peninsula, as if Crimean Tatars do not exist. They're trying to, so to say, delete the identity of Crimean Tatars, and they still don't make it, because we see a lot of resistance in the peninsula, and it's important that Ukrainian state is trying to protect all of the people who live in temporarily occupied territory. They try to support everybody who moved from temporarily occupied territories, as with symbolic activities such as celebration of Vyshyvanka Day and issue of the post stamp that I've mentioned, but not only with symbolic activities, but even the fact that we hold those activities related to commemoration of deportation that involved the head of the state, all those activities that involve the head of the parliament, all those activities that are going on all across the state, the communication campaigns that are supported and implemented by central and local governments. In Khreshchatyk Street, well, you were able to see all those city lights, the boards with information about the 80th anniversary of deportation. In coordination with Mejlis of Crimean Tatar People, with the government agencies, in cooperation with the journalists and civil organizations, we do a lot to commemorate the victims of deportations and to support the Crimean Tatar people in general. Thank you very much, Ms. Tamila, Mr. Refat. This year is the year of difficult losses for us. It's year 11 of occupation of Crimean Peninsula. It's the 80th anniversary of genocide of Crimean Tatar people, of their deportation. I'm sure you have something to say about the lessons learned and historic parallels, those horrific historic parallels that we clearly realize. We see them. We cannot help but draw those parallels between our deported children and Crimean Tatars back then, 80 years ago. So what else can we do to reinforce this message so it reaches the international audience? How to make sure our children remember it? Thank you very much. I think that I will be repeating something that Mr. Miller has said, but those are the axioms we're supposed to learn. It's clear that any society, any normal society is taking care of today and thinking about tomorrow. That's normal for every community, every single person, like what's going on with us today and what's going to happen to our children tomorrow. And we know that if we don't realize what has happened to us yesterday in the past, we won't be able to sort out what's going on today. Those are the axioms, and it's important for us to see the connection between those horrible tragedies that happened to Crimean Tatar people and Ukraine in the previous century, and those tribulations that we're going through now, this war that's going on for more than 10 years now, that is waged by Russia against Ukraine. If we just move 80 years back to Crimea, today is 15th or 16th, yeah, it's 16th of May. So basically 5 days ago, on the 11th of May, year 1944, the order of the State Defense Committee of USSR was signed by Stalin. May 11, 1944, Stalin signed this order that starts with the following words. During the period of the war, many Crimean Tatars deserted the ranks of the army, switching sides with the enemy, and so on and so forth. Just recall the address of Russian tyrant Putin during those minutes when the missiles were falling on the heads of denizens of Kiev on the 24th of February 2022. The explanations were the same, but already in regard to Ukraine. On the 16th of May 1944, the villages that were populated by the Crimean Tatars, there were military garrisons installed around them. I didn't take that map of my village with me. We found it in the archive. There are troops everywhere back then that would ensure the eviction of Crimean Tatars. People were coming to them asking, like, what's going on? And the Red Army were saying that they were sent there for rest and relaxation, that shortly they will be sent to the front lines to finish it with the fascist troops. Well, and the people were relieved from fascist occupation. They were laundering things for those Red Army troops. They were giving them food and milk, and on the 18th of May, those very same soldiers entered the homes of those people who were laundering their things, who were giving them food. They brought all those people to their railway stations, and those railway cars for cattle, they were forwarded to the remote areas of Siberia, Ural, Middle Asia. Whoever studies those documents, they may see that when the trains started going from Crimea, their regime immediately recalled that they need working hands in chopping forests in taiga. So Beria signed an order to bring the people to Siberia too, 30,000 of them. There was another tragedy in that community because some of the villages were so large in terms of population that it was taking a couple of trains to populate all of them, and like nobody was asking where are the families, the parents, the kids. They were thrown at those freight cars just like cattle. And this deportation was accompanied by separation of a lot of families. I want to repeat it so we remember those words, that unpunished evil tends to return, and it returns with more terrible crimes. And the fact that Moscow was able to evade this accountability as a political center who was directing those crimes of genocide, of Holodomor, of deportation, the fact that they evaded this punishment is one of the explanations of the factors that contributed to the commencement of war in Ukraine in 2014, the war that continues until now. That was one of the reasons. It's important for us, when we commemorate the victims of genocides, it's important for us to have mitigated the consequences of those genocide inside our country. That's very important. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but me being a people's deputy, I was taking part in this process. You know, the recognition of Holodomor as a crime of genocide, it met a lot of resistance inside Ukrainian parliament. Hundreds of people's deputies were against recognition, like asserting that, you know, that was a famine that was inherent in that period, that was resulting from circumstances, from objective circumstances of that time. And obviously those people were opposing recognition of deportation of Crimean Tatars as genocide. I remember the addresses of those deputies. As a rule, they were communists who were saying, like, those were the times of war, like we wouldn't have won without that. But again, you can say whatever you want when it was not you and your people who were killed. And for us to overcome it, for us as a big Ukrainian consciousness, to overcome all those obstacles of recognition, of deportations, of genocides, fortunately we achieved it after a number of tribulations, until people were not feeling it on their own skin, until the missiles hit the courtyards of those people. I think that currently in Ukraine there are no people who wouldn't have realized that back in the 20th century, and now they were attempting and they continue attempting to kill us using those factors that led to Russians attack of Ukraine, and all those crimes committed against Ukrainian people. It's not about conquering of territory. It's about eradication of Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian state. I don't see any other factors. And again, let me repeat myself. It's important to remove the internal background to become more resilient, to become more conscious, to oppose their new attempts to eradicate us. I just want to give you a small example, a consequence of deportation of Crimean Tatar people. What we have to remove, and we try to do that, is that planting of Russian imperial policy in Crimea and in Ukraine. There were 3 resolutions of that government back in 1944, 1945, and 1948. There were orders of the presidency or the President's Council of Russian Soviet Republic. Just imagine small Crimea, 460 names that contain some signs of Crimean Tatar culture, their history. They wanted to eradicate all of the traces of Crimean Tatar people. They wanted to make Crimea Russian, not Tatar. In the same way, they tried to transform Donbass and Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, the temporarily occupied parts of it. They even issued the new order on overcoming the Russian imperial policy, science and decolonization, but we are still in discussion about what names are supposed to be removed. So let me finish with the words that commemoration of victims of genocides that were committed in Ukraine, I mean the Holodomor, Holocaust, and Sargon, they do not only demonstrate our dignity and our commemoration of our history, but it's a guarantee to prevent the repetition of it. It's not some words that I'm saying, but the circumstances of the March 2014 and February 2022 should convince everybody that if we don't condemn it, if we don't reinforce ourselves, if we don't fortify, everything will be repeated. But again, thank you very much. I appreciate my opportunity to express these thoughts of mine to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Refat. It's difficult to imagine today that part of our people's deputies, part of our parliamentaries back in 2015 were opposing the recognition of deportation of Crimean Tatar people as genocide. But again, that's another proof of the words of Ms. Tamila that we've made a tremendous leap. But again, we would like to discuss the situation in Crimea today, what's going on there now, what are the crimes that Russians commit there until this moment, and about our our prisoners that are still being held in captivity. If we may, let's talk about them, what's known now, what's going on there, and what is the number of political prisoners that we have available information about. Thank you very much for your question. Well, basically, talking about what's going on now can take real long, unfortunately, because the situation that started evolving there since 2014 is the mass persecution of certain groups of population, first of all Crimean Tatars and politically conscious Ukrainians. Those were the attempts of eradication their representative institutions in the peninsula. So in fact, prevention of work of Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people in the peninsula and eradication of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Archbishop Clement has already stated that the church does not exist in Crimea. The mass searches in the homes of Crimean Tatars and politically conscious Ukrainians, the politically motivated persecutions for the time being. We have 218 persons who were deprived of freedom as a politically motivated persecution. 60%, more than 60% of them are Crimean Tatars. We see here ethnically biased persecution, and this position is taken into account by the International Criminal Court. Mr. Refat was taken part in the proceedings of this court and the Court of the United Nations, and obviously is the eradication of the cultural heritage of Crimean Tatar people, first of all, and such biggest facilities as Khan's Palace in Bakhchisarai. And once again, I would like to repeat this statement of Refat, who said that Russia doesn't need any other identity in Crimea other than Russian. And basically, this is the foundation for all those persecutions for eradication of cultural heritage, persecution of Crimean Tatars and eradication of cultural heritage of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians. And did you know the presence of Crimean Tatars in Crimea puts the presence of Russia in Crimea under question. We hear this statement from the Russians that the Crimea used to be Russian forever, and it's obviously a result of systemic colonization policy of USSR, Russian Federation, Russian Empire, starting from at least as early as 18th century, because they were colonizing Crimea starting from the 18th century with the destruction of Khan's Palace and displacement of indigenous population from the peninsula, and the end point for the Soviet government was the deportation in year 1944. And we see the repetition of this colonialism now, starting from the year 2014. And this statement that we keep hearing is related to quite a broad propaganda campaign that has not started 10 years ago, believe me, not even 20 or 30 years ago. It started way longer ago, and the presence of Crimean Tatars in the public space in the peninsula, with cultural facilities, with toponymics, the names of the villages and towns, it puts under big question this Russian nature of Crimea, this statement about Sevastopol as the city of Russian sailmen. So it's important to emphasize it as we communicate it to the foreign audience and explaining it to the Ukrainian society that it's the Ukrainian land that had centuries of experience of communication, of cooperation with the Crimean Tatars. That was always the cooperation, not the enslavement as it happened in case of Russian Empire. And that desire to eradicate and delete the identity of Crimean Tatars in the peninsula is reflected in a huge number of political prisoners among Crimean Tatars, destruction of cultural facilities, the prohibition of any commemoration activities, 80th anniversary or any other anniversary, everything is related to targeted mobilization of the Crimean Tatars to the war against Ukraine that resulted in a wave of immigration from the peninsula. But I would like to end on the positive note. After the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we see some previously unseen growth of activism in Crimea, the protest activism, protest and very actively pro-Ukrainian. We monitor court proceedings in the peninsula, and if we talk about an article 20.3.3 of Administrative Code of Russian Federation, there's the discrediting of the armed forces of Russian Federation. What is discrediting in their opinion? It's the blue and yellow lacquer on the nails. It's the yellow ribbon is the rejected service, the Russian military is the flower seller who picks the flowers of yellow and blue colors, and after she was approached by FSB with demand to put a Colorado strip on them, we can, like, she still refused and she was arrested. And I can give you lots of such examples. That's the tip of the iceberg. This is something that we were able to track through the registers when, people were forced to apologize in front of the camera. Those are the methods of KGB that they were using back in Chechnya. And 800 cases, among them 41% are related to females. Females are real powerful in Ukraine. Look at the number of women in the ranks of the army. And again, it's another confirmation of the statement that Crimea is Ukraine. The women are real intense there. And if we compare these statistics of those cases all across Russian Federation and the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, back in 22, this percentage was like 5%. I mean, Crimea against and other occupied territories against the rest of the territory. In year 23, this percentage comes to 15 already, which means that people in Crimea are not ready to live under occupation. They oppose the war, which means people in Crimea are waiting for the armed forces of Ukraine. They know that Ukraine is fighting for them, and this is positive, I think. Me and our people in Crimea, they continue asserting that Crimea is Ukraine, continue proving that Crimea is Ukraine, because Ukrainians are the people. I'm talking about Ukrainians as a political nation, as a nation who is not used to live under authoritarian regimes. Any authoritarian signs were always rejected by Ukrainians. Just recall the events of year 2001, 2014, 13, 2004, we show how we repel those authoritarian attempts. This is what makes us different from the Russians, and we see this section of the protest movement in the territory of the peninsula, and apparently we almost don't see it after 2 years of war in the Russian Federation. Thank you very much, dear friends. Do we have any questions on the floor? Please raise your hands and let me know.
Assalamu alaikum, Dobry den. I have a question about the internally displaced population. And then, Yashika. No.
Let me just put it on real quick.
Yashika, no. I would like the viewers and our friends to know the population of Tatar people that are in Russian, both captivity and in the country, naturally, and then the internally displaced population, and then last, externally displaced from both Ukraine and Russia or Crimea. Дякую.
When we say about IDPs, it's internal displaced person inside Ukraine, yes? A lot of people, unfortunately, after 2014, they moved from Crimea to mainland of Ukraine. And approximately data of all people, not only Crimean Tatars, but Ukrainians with Ukrainian ID to mainland of Ukraine, approximately 55,000 people before full-scale invasion, from 2014 up to 2022. But unofficial data, it's maybe bigger twice. It's near 100,000 people. After full-scale invasion, a lot of people had to flee Crimea, not to a mainland of Ukraine, because it's really very difficult way from Crimean Peninsula to mainland of Ukraine, because only one way, it's via carriage bridge or this peripravas from Azov Sea, yes, to Russian Federation. And only one way, it's via Russia to third countries and then to return to mainland of Ukraine. After beginning of mobilization campaign, which started at autumn 2022, a lot of people once again had to flee Crimea. And mostly it's a Crimean Tatar population, unfortunately, because I mentioned it, mobilization in Russian Federation and temporarily occupied territories in Crimea targeted to Crimean Tatar population. That is why we don't have exact numbers how many IDPs now we have, unfortunately, and we don't have exact number how many Crimean Tatars. Why? Because all of us, we are Ukrainian citizens. We don't have this line with ethnical profiling in our passport, all of our Ukrainian citizens. That is why when our Minister of Social Policy, they registered all these IDPs, they don't know it's ethnical profiling, it's, I don't know, Greek people, Crimean Tatar people, or Ukrainian people. It's Ukrainian citizens. That's why we say it's approximately maybe near 200,000 people who fled Crimea after 2014 and after full-scale invasion. Mostly not in Russia. Mostly our people flee Crimea to mainland of Ukraine and to third countries, to Turkey, to Central Asia countries, to European Union, to Great Britain, to Ireland, but mostly not to Russia. No.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to add just a couple of words about the people displaced to Russia. We all know that Russian Federation brutally violates any international laws, international agreements, and the same happens to Geneva Convention, which envisages that the occupying party is not supposed to deport population from temporarily occupied territories and to bring any population to those territories. All of the citizens of Ukraine who are being convicted of politically motivated crimes after the court resolution, they are all brought to the territory of Russian Federation when they are being held in captivity, in illegal captivity in Ukraine. That's an absolute violation of international law, but Russia still does it. We understand why they do it. It's to complicate the protection of those people when they're being held in captivity. I mean, the excess of the lawyers and all those related things. It's impossible to work in Ukraine. And on top of that, that complicates their communication with their families. And this is how Russians want to additionally punish our people. Yet another aspect is related to Geneva Convention, is the movement of their population to the territory of temporarily occupied Crimea. We keep talking about it in all of the international platforms and inside of our country in order to prevent any unforeseen consequences after Crimea is liberated. We keep reiterating our stance and we try to have it rely upon the international law and the necessity to improve our national legislation. I'm talking about the fact that all those people are supposed to leave the territory of Crimea as soon as it's liberated. Everybody who illegally moved to Crimea starting from the year 2014 upon the resolution of the International Criminal Court, exactly from the date when Russia started exercising the effective control of the Crimean Peninsula. It's not our position because we're bloodthirsty, but it's because those people committed crimes against the state of Ukraine. By that movement to Crimea, people reinforced the occupation of Crimea. And if we imagine that those people stay, it's millions of them, using some democratic mechanisms, they will just smash our will to decide things on our own in our state of Ukraine. That's a very important aspect of the occupation of Crimea that's still ongoing. And I would like to ask all of the journalists to cover this problem too. And third thing related to people forcibly leaving. You know, that's the universal Crimean Tatar tragedy. When Crimea was first annexed by Russian Empire in 1783, just imagine that it was almost mono-ethnic. 97% of Crimean population was Crimean Tatar. In a little bit more than 100 years, we were in absolute minority in our land. Stalin, 80 years ago, having deported all of the Crimean Tatars from Crimea, he thought is the final resolution of Crimean Tatar problem, but we kept on fighting. Crimean Tatar movement was one of the biggest non-violent movements in the Soviet Union. We're back to our homeland, but now Russian Federation tries to create the conditions to cleanse Crimea out of Crimean Tatars. Repressions is the main mechanism thanks to which Russia keeps trying to force Crimean Tatars to leave Crimea. Repressions, repressions, and more repressions. So what esteemed Ms. Tamila was saying, more than 60% of all of the political prisoners are Crimean Tatars. That's an equal correlation, because it's only 13% of Crimean Tatars living in the peninsula, but their percentage among the repressed ones is 60%. So when the so-called partial mobilization was announced in Russian Federation, the most actively they started this mobilization in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, first of all in Crimea, and they decided that mobilization is yet another additional tool to deal with the non-loyal population. And it's clear they had this chance to deal with Crimean Tatars. And in some villages, they were bringing the draft notices to the villages where 80% of the population were Crimean Tatars. And we urged all of the Crimean Tatars in temporarily occupied Crimea to evade mobilization, whether forced on any other type of mobilization. People found no other ways than leaving Crimea. I just want you to understand that for the Crimean Tatar people, it's a universal tragedy, because despite the occupation, the Crimean Tatar people has clear realization of the fact that they are supposed to stay in Crimea whatever it takes. There is a slogan, Krim da Yasha, live in Crimea, no matter what. But this mobilization, the attempt to evade taking up the arms to fight against their own people, it left no other way for the people than to leave their homeland. And the majority of them currently live in European countries. In Turkey, we incredibly appreciate the input of those who made it to the mainland Ukraine and joined the ranks of the security and defense forces. Now thousands of Crimean Tatars are fighting for the independence of the state of Ukraine. So this is the situation with all those movements and displacements of people. Mr. Refat, Ms. Tamila, in the end of our conversation, we would like to ask you this question about the 80th anniversary of commemoration. What is your recommendation for remembrance for Ukrainians? Maybe you would recommend joining some activities, watching some documentaries. What will be the best expression of support of Crimean Tatar people? Well, in fact, both in Ukraine and abroad, there's a lot of activities, and I would like to use this opportunity and thank all the representatives of all the civil organizations, think tanks, regional governments, the academics, everybody who is involved in an incredible number of activities. Me and Refat, we are co-heads of the committee that was created by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, where we discuss all those activities that were taking place on the level of the government, on the level of the state during these days of 18th, 19th of May. But it doesn't mean that, again, during these days we hold those activities and it's done. No, we will continue with those activities all year long. And basically last year the president has announced that this year the monument to the victims of the deportation will be open. So far I don't announce either the place or the time of opening, but it will be open during the first half of the year, which is very important for the Crimean Tatars to have a place where they can lay the flowers to, where they can come and reflect, to recall their family members who have unfortunately become victims of such crimes, so that Crimean Tatars and the denizens of Kiev can do that. Obviously, the representatives of other ethnic communities may join all those activities, those who understand the gravity of this crime against Crimean Tatars, and in the same way to commemorate this memory. In fact, it's a very good tradition that was founded during Holodomor, the candle of remembrance. Crimean Tatars don't have such traditions as it is, but any shape, any form, I mean, any citizen can get involved, either to post something on social networks like Facebook or Twitter, write something, some letter, some words of support and compassion to their friends in Crimea. They can send a letter to an imprisoned Crimean Tatar who is staying in captivity in Russian Federation. You can check out this information of the website of the community. So every type of activity is favored, and it will be highly appreciated by every single Crimean Tatar. Thank you. Let me just continue a little bit. Us as Ukrainians, as Ukrainian state, Crimean Tatars, as Ukrainian political nation, we have a lot of challenges, but we have one huge threat, is the Russian threat, and sometimes I refer to the behavior of the aggressor. Like, look, on the very second date of this, after the so-called inauguration, on the 8th of May, Putin has immediately signed an order on the government policy in the sphere of political enlightenment. So he provides parameters for the Russian society, how they are supposed to assess their history, and Putin wants to use his history as an instrument to conquer other peoples. If you read through this order, and if you read through the order of the Russian People's Sobors, Russian People's Meeting, if you want to understand what is modern-day fascism, please read through these two documents. For me, it's a bright illustration of the existing threat posed by our enemy. Why am I mentioning this? As a Ukrainian society, we have to take efforts to realize our history, what has happened to us. You've asked what can be done during these days to support the realization of Crimean Tatar tragedy. On YouTube, there is a film by Ahtem Saitablayev called Haytarma. It has subtitles in Turkish, Crimean Tatar, Ukrainian, and English. The value of this film is because the eyewitnesses of that deportation are being filmed. When the film was made in the year 22-23, they were grown-ups, but back then, during deportation, they were small kids, and I hope this film will help you realize how it was all happening. Ms. Tamila was talking about the organization committee. We incredibly appreciate all the efforts of the committee. A lot of activities are already taking place that are organized by this committee. And as a Crimean Tatar people, we appreciate the support of Global Congress of Ukrainians, who in cooperation with local communities of Crimean Tatars, and where the Crimean Tatars don't live, Ukrainian communities based on their own initiative, they hold a lot of activities dedicated to commemoration of genocide of Crimean Tatar people. It's clear that we continue working with the politicians of other countries to make sure that their parliaments recognize deportation of Crimean Tatar people as a crime of genocide. For the time being, the resolution of the Parliament of Ukraine was joined by the parliaments of Latvia, Lithuania, and Canada. our representatives, Ukrainian politicians, work with the members of parliaments of other countries. And as you were able to see in this address of the Parliament of Ukraine that was approved on the 8th of May of this year, this call is reiterated to the parliaments of our partner countries to recognize the deportation as genocide. And using this opportunity on behalf of the whole Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people, I want to thank the Ukrainian society who in different ways during these days they commemorate this tragedy. The local military administrations, regional military administrations, civil organizations, the academia, institutes, universities, civil organizations, everybody. I want to thank everybody for what they're doing. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for this important conversation. I would like to thank our colleagues for their interest to this topic, and we continue working together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.